Emma used to believe that love was something you could measure in warmth, shared laughter, a hand reaching for yours in the dark, the simple rhythm of a quiet morning together. But lately, every moment with Michael felt cold, like standing in a room where the fire had long gone out and only the ashes remained. To the world, they were perfect. The Wallaces, successful, attractive, admired. Their friends envied the elegance of their life. The sprawling suburban house framed by winter frost, the way Michael placed his hand gently on Emma's back at parties, the way she smiled when he spoke. But behind the curated facade, something invisible had started to rot. Michael was attentive in the ways that mattered publicly, pulling out her chair, offering her wine, complimenting her dress. Yet his affection carried precision rather than warmth, as if rehearsed for an audience. When the guests left, so did his tenderness. The silence between them grew sharp, measured, and heavy enough to hear. He had always been a man of routine, early mornings, late nights, his office door closed while he worked. But in recent months, his routines had changed. New habits appeared without explanation. He began staying out late, claiming late meetings. His phone always face down on the counter. When she asked, he smiled with gentle authority, the kind that ended questions instead of answering them. "You worry too much, Em? You always have." That line, once tender, now stung, because maybe she did worry too much, but only because she had begun to see things that didn't fit. A smudge of something dark on his cuff, a faint smell of bleach on his hands one night. Small things, disconnected and meaningless, until you placed them side by side. Still, Emma tried to convince herself it was nothing, that love could outlast suspicion, that maybe this was simply what marriage became, an exercise in forgiveness for sins we couldn't quite name. Winter came early that year. The snow outside softened everything, but the cold inside their home felt sharper, cleaner. She caught herself watching him sometimes, his profile in the dim glow of their living room, the way his expression would go blank when he thought she wasn't looking. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. It was that trust itself had begun to feel like a story she told herself to survive. That night, as she turned off the lights and climbed into bed beside him, she noticed his briefcase near the foot of the bed. A faint red stain marked the leather handle. He reached for it first thing in the morning, brushing off her glance with a reassuring smile. "Old ink," he said. "Don't worry," she didn't reply. The snow outside kept falling, silent and endless, blanketing everything it touched. But beneath that stillness, something darker was beginning to stir, something waiting quietly in the walls of their perfect home. And soon, Emma would learn that every secret has a locked door. The next morning, the snow had stopped, but the silence in the house had not. Emma moved through the rooms like a ghost, tracing her fingers along the surfaces Michael had once promised would hold their memories. Every shelf, every corner seemed too clean, scrubbed, polished, controlled. Michael had left early again. He said he had a presentation. She didn't ask for details. Questions seemed to irritate him lately, as though curiosity itself were an act of betrayal. Still, she noticed the small things, the faint scent of metal that clung to his shirts, the subtle indentation on the carpet where a box had once been, now gone. Each night his return grew later, his excuses smoother. When he smiled, it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. One evening, while folding laundry, Emma found another stain on his collar, dark, dried, almost brown. She pressed her thumb against it. Wasn't ink this time. It looked older, heavier. When she asked about it, he didn't hesitate. "Rust," he said simply, slipping the shirt from her hands. "From the basement pipes." Then, before she could reply, he added, "I don't want you going down there, Emma. It's dangerous. The flooring's unstable." It was the first time he had ever forbidden her anything in their own home. That night, she stood at the top of the basement stairs, her breath visible in the cold air. The door was heavy, painted white like the rest of the house except for a small keyhole beneath the handle. She pressed her ear against it, listening. Nothing, only the deep hum of the furnace below. But when she stepped back, she could have sworn she heard something faint, like the scrape of metal on concrete, followed by silence. The next day, she brought it up lightly over breakfast. "I thought I heard something downstairs last night." Michael looked up from his paper, his expression unreadable. "You should get more sleep," he said softly. "You've always had an active imagination." He said it kindly, but the words carried an edge that lingered long after he left for work. By afternoon, the house felt colder. Emma poured herself coffee and sat near the window, watching her reflection blur against the frost. She didn't feel crazy, not yet, but she could sense the truth curling around her like smoke. Thick, invisible, and dangerous. And when the doorbell rang that evening, breaking the silence, she had no idea that the man standing on the other side would speak the words that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her husband. The man at the door looked like winter itself, gaunt, pale, wrapped in a worn coat that had seen too many storms. His eyes flicked past Emma as though expecting someone else. "Mrs. Wallace?" he asked, voice low and hoarse. She nodded cautiously. "Yes, can I help you?" He swallowed, his gaze darting to the quiet street behind him. "Is Michael home?" "He's at work." A strange mix of relief and dread crossed his face. He hesitated, then leaned closer. "Then you should listen carefully." Something in his tone froze her. "Who are you?" The man's lips trembled around the truth he seemed afraid to speak. "An old friend. Or I used to be." His eyes darkened. "You need to be careful, Mrs. Wallace. You don't know what your husband is capable of." Before she could reply, he turned and walked away, his footsteps muffled by the snow. Emma stood in the doorway for several seconds, the cold air biting her skin. His words echoed, sharp and poisonous. When Michael came home that night, she tried to sound casual. "Someone came by earlier. Said he knew you. A friend." Michael paused in the hallway, setting down his briefcase with deliberate calm. "What was his name?" He didn't say. "Just that I should be careful." He smiled then, slow, controlled, like someone rehearsing the emotion. "Emma," he said softly, almost pitying, "you really must stop letting strangers scare you." "He knew you, Michael." He laughed lightly, a sound too smooth to be genuine. "People say anything when they want attention. You're too trusting. It's one of the things I love about you." The way he said love made her flinch. It felt less like affection and more like ownership. That night she couldn't sleep. She replayed every word the man had spoken, every expression on Michael's face. She wanted to believe her husband, but something inside her, a quiet, instinctive dread, kept whispering that the stranger hadn't lied. In the morning, the stranger was gone from her thoughts only for a moment. Then, while cleaning, she noticed footprints near the back door, larger than her own, damp, fresh, leading away toward the basement steps. When she asked Michael about them, his response was too quick, too easy. "The delivery man," he said. He dropped something off, but she knew no deliveries had come. And later that evening, when she walked through the basement hallway, she caught sight of something dark beneath the rug, something that looked disturbingly like a stain. The stain was small, dark, irregular, almost hidden beneath the edge of the rug. Emma might have missed it if not for the faint shimmer of dried residue catching the light from the basement window. At first, she thought it was old paint or rust, something harmless. But when she crouched down, the smell reached her, faint, metallic, unmistakable. Blood, her stomach tightened. She stared at it, willing it to be something else, anything else. The basement air was cold, heavy with dust, the silence pressing against her ears. She touched the rug's edge, about to lift it fully, when she heard the soft creak of footsteps behind her. "Emma." Michael's voice was calm, almost gentle. She froze, her hand still gripping the fabric. Slowly she looked up. He stood at the top of the stairs, his silhouette framed by the faint yellow light from the hall. "What are you doing down here?" "I dropped something earlier," she lied. "I thought I saw—" His eyes followed hers to the rug. In 2 quick strides, he was beside her. Without a word, he pulled the rug back, glanced at the mark, then replaced it. "That," he said lightly, "is from when I cut my hand last year fixing the pipes. You remember?" "I don't," she murmured. "Well," he said, smiling faintly, "you wouldn't. You faint at the sight of blood, don't you?" The remark was playful, but something in his tone made her shiver. He reached for her hand, guiding her back toward the stairs. "You shouldn't be down here anyway. It's damp, unhealthy. I told you that before." Emma let him lead her, though every step felt heavier. When they reached the top, he turned to lock the door. The metallic click echoed down the hallway like a warning. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The color, the smell, the way his story had come too easily. She lay awake, the image of that stain burned into her mind. Was it really old blood? Or something far newer? And sometime after midnight, as she drifted between fear and exhaustion, she thought she heard faint noises below the floor, like whispers moving through the pipes, or someone pacing in the dark. The noises began again 3 nights later. Emma woke to the sound of muffled voices drifting up through the floorboards. A man's tone, low and deliberate, followed by a faint reply she couldn't quite make out. She sat up, heart hammering, straining to listen. The clock on the nightstand glowed 2:13 a.m. Michael wasn't beside her. The voices came again, this time sharper, more distinct. One was definitely his. The other, no, there couldn't be another. They were alone in the house. Barefoot, she crept down the hallway, the cold air biting at her skin. The basement door stood half open, a thin beam of light spilling across the floor. She hesitated, every instinct screaming to turn back, yet curiosity pulled her forward. She descended slowly, each step creaking under her weight. The voices stopped. The only sound was the hum of the furnace. When she reached the bottom, the air felt thicker, heavy with damp and something she couldn't name. "Michael," she whispered. No answer. She moved toward the locked door, the one he had forbidden her to enter. The light came from beneath it, a thin, steady glow. Kneeling, she peered through the keyhole. Inside, she saw movement, a shadow crossing the light. Then nothing, the bulb above her flickered. The glow vanished under the door. Footsteps sounded behind her. "Emma?" She spun around. Michael stood halfway down the stairs wearing his robe, his expression calm but unreadable. "What are you doing down here?" he asked softly. "I heard voices," she said, her words trembling. "You were talking to someone." His brow furrowed in gentle confusion. "Emma, there's no one here. I heard, you've been anxious lately," he interrupted. "Not sleeping, not eating? You're imagining things. I'm not." He stepped closer, his voice still soothing, but it pressed against her like a weight. "You need rest. You've always had such vivid dreams. That's all this is. A dream you walked into." She wanted to argue, to shout, but the certainty in his tone made her doubt herself. He reached for her hand, guiding her back up the stairs as if she were fragile. When she glanced back, the basement door stood wide open. The light beneath it flickered once more, before dying completely. Later, lying awake beside him, she tried to convince herself he was right, that she was exhausted, nothing more. Yet every creak of the house sounded like footsteps below. Every sigh of the wind like a whisper through the pipes. And in the morning, the knock at their door would make her realize she wasn't the only one listening. The morning after the strange voices. The knock came, a firm, authoritative rhythm that made Emma flinch. She exchanged a wary glance with Michael before opening the door. A tall man stood there, his coat dusted with frost, a badge clipped neatly to his belt. "Detective Alvarez," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. "I'm looking into a series of missing persons in the area. Just routine questions, ma'am." "May I come in?" Emma hesitated. Michael, ever the gracious host, stepped forward. "Of course, detective, please." The detective entered, his eyes scanning the pristine living room, the perfectly arranged shelves. He carried a notebook but didn't write anything yet. Instead, his gaze lingered on the family photographs, the spotless carpet, the faint tension that hummed between husband and wife. "Apologies for the intrusion," he said. "A few of the missing were last seen near this neighborhood. Just want to know if you've noticed anyone suspicious. Unfamiliar vehicles, late-night noises, anything out of the ordinary." Emma's heart thudded. She opened her mouth to speak, but Michael's hand rested gently on her arm. "We haven't seen anything unusual," he said smoothly. "Quiet neighborhood. Everyone keeps to themselves." Alvarez nodded but didn't look away from him. "You've lived here long?" 7 years, Michael replied, smiling easily. "We like it peaceful." The detective's eyes flicked to Emma. "And you, Mrs. Wallace? Nothing strange at all?" Her throat went dry. The image of the basement door, the voices, the bloodstain, all pressed against her mind. "No," she whispered finally. "Nothing." Michael smiled approvingly, but she could feel his gaze sharpening, watchful. Alvarez nodded again, though his expression betrayed quiet skepticism. Sometimes people notice things and don't realize how important they are. If something feels wrong, it usually is. He handed her his card. If you remember anything, day or night, call me. Michael took the card before she could. We will. When the door shut, silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Michael stood still for a long moment, staring at the closed door, then turned to her with that familiar calm. They're just doing their job, he said softly. You didn't need to look so nervous. I wasn't. You were, he interrupted, his tone still gentle but firm. You don't want them thinking we have something to hide, do you? That night when he left for work, she noticed the card still on the counter. Her hand hovered over it, trembling, and then she saw it, the small brass key lying beside it, gleaming faintly under the kitchen light. The key to the basement door. The key glinted like a secret. Emma stared at it for a long time before picking it up, her pulse pounding in her ears. Michael had left for work an hour ago. Another late meeting, another excuse. The house was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls. She moved quietly down the hallway toward the basement. Each step felt heavier than the last, her breath shallow, her fingers cold. When she reached the door, her reflection in the brass handle startled her. Pale, drawn, unfamiliar. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she slid the key into the lock. The click was soft, almost tender. The door creaked open. The air was cool and thick, filled with the faint scent of iron and dust. The light switch flickered once before settling into a dim, yellow glow. The room was smaller than she imagined, more like a study than a workshop. A wooden desk stood against the far wall, its surface immaculate except for a single closed book at the center. She approached it slowly, her heartbeat drumming louder with every step. The book was leather-bound, its edges worn, its cover blank. When she opened it, the smell of old ink and something darker rose to meet her. The first pages contained lists, rows of names written in Michael's neat, deliberate handwriting. Some were crossed out, others underlined. Next to several names were short notes: obedient, resisted, gone too soon. Emma turned another page. Her vision blurred for a moment before refocusing. The pages that followed were filled with sketches, faces of women. Some she didn't recognize. Others looked hauntingly familiar. One in particular made her breath stop. It was the woman from the news, missing 2 months now. Another sketch looked almost like herself. Her hand flew to her mouth. She flipped to the back of the book. The final page contained a single line, written in precise script: the test of love is obedience. And when she disobeys, the truth must be made. A sound from upstairs made her jump. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Panic surged through her veins. She closed the journal, returned it to its place, and turned off the light. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the key. The footsteps paused above her, then faded toward the kitchen. She locked the door again, forcing her breathing to steady. Her world had changed in a single heartbeat, and when Michael returned that night, his smile seemed sharper, his eyes searching her face as if he already knew. That night, Emma couldn't stop shaking. Every breath felt too loud, every glance from Michael too sharp. She sat across from him at dinner, forcing a smile, pretending nothing had changed. But something had. She had seen behind the curtain, and he could sense it. He cut his steak in silence, his movements deliberate, surgical. "You've been quiet lately," he said finally. "Is something wrong?" "No," she lied. "Just tired." "Tired." He repeated the word slowly, as if tasting it. "You've been tired a lot these days. Nervous, distracted." "I'm fine, Michael." He looked up, his eyes calm but cold. "You're lying." Her fork froze halfway to her lips. "Excuse me?" He smiled thinly. "I know you, Emma. I can tell when you're keeping something from me." The air between them thickened. She set her fork down carefully, her fingers trembling. "Maybe I just need some space." His expression hardened. "Space from your husband?" He chuckled under his breath, but there was no humor in it. "That's not what love looks like." After dinner, he followed her from room to room under the guise of conversation, his eyes always on her. When she left her phone on the counter, he picked it up casually, scrolling through messages. "You've been talking to anyone new?" he asked without looking up. "No." "Good," he said, setting it down with deliberate care. "I like us the way we are, just you and me." Each word felt like a cage closing around her. She could feel him watching her constantly now, his gaze in the mirrors, his presence behind every door. Even the house itself seemed to shift under his control. At night, she pretended to sleep while his hand rested on her waist, possessive, heavy. She imagined slipping out from under it, running, disappearing, but fear pinned her to the mattress. By morning, she had made her decision. If she stayed silent, she would vanish like the others. But to leave, she needed help, and she knew exactly who could give it. When Michael left for work, she found Detective Alvarez's card in the drawer, edges bent, words faint but legible. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number. Detective Alvarez speaking. Emma swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's me, Emma Wallace. I found something, and I think I'm in danger." Emma's voice trembled as she spoke into the phone. "Detective Alvarez, it's me. I can't keep pretending anymore." He knows something's different. There was a pause on the line, then Alvarez's calm reply. "You did the right thing calling me, Mrs. Wallace. Tell me what you found." She told him everything, the journal, the sketches, the names. Each word felt heavier than the last. When she finished, there was only silence. Then Alvarez said quietly, "We've been watching him, but now, with what you've told me, we can act. We just need proof. Will you help us get it?" Emma hesitated, her heart pounding. "If I don't, he'll kill me." "That's exactly why we'll do this carefully," Alvarez said. "Stay calm. Do what you always do. Let him believe nothing's changed." Easier said than done. The following days became an endless performance. Emma smiled when he entered the room, laughed when he made conversation, leaned into his touch even when her skin crawled. She rehearsed every movement, every glance, every word, because one slip could expose her. But Michael was changing too. His questions grew sharper, his eyes colder. "You've been restless lately," he said one evening as she poured him a drink. "Talking less. Thinking more. What are you thinking about, Emma?" She smiled softly. "You?" He studied her face for a long time before answering. "Good." That night Alvarez called from a number saved under a fake contact. "Flower shop." His voice was low. "Tomorrow night. I'll have a team nearby. We need him to show us what's behind that door. Don't do anything reckless." Emma's hand trembled around the phone. "And if he does something before then, call me, no matter the time." She hung up and turned to find Michael standing in the doorway, watching her. "Who were you talking to?" Her stomach dropped. "Just confirming an order for flowers." "For your office." He smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't move from her face. "You've never cared for flowers before." She forced a laugh. "Maybe I'm changing." He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, voice soft but dangerous. "I can see that." That night she couldn't sleep. The phone rested under her pillow, Alvarez's number glowing faintly on the screen. Downstairs, she heard the familiar sound of the basement door creaking open. And when Michael returned to bed, his hand brushed her cheek gently. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we should talk about everything. Just you and me." Emma stared into the darkness, her pulse steady with terror. Tomorrow, the trap would finally be set. The next evening arrived heavy with dread. Emma felt it the moment she woke. The house too quiet, the air too still. She moved through the day as if underwater, her body mechanical, her mind fixed on survival. By dusk, Michael had already set the table, candles flickering. He greeted her with a calm that felt rehearsed. "You look beautiful tonight," he said softly, his voice edged with something she couldn't name. "Thank you," she murmured. They ate in silence. Every scrape of silverware sounded amplified, every heartbeat a drumbeat of panic. When she tried to stand, he reached across the table, resting his hand gently over hers. "Don't go yet," he said. "We need to talk." Her pulse quickened. "About what?" he smiled. "About the truth." The words hung between them, thick and suffocating. Slowly he rose, motioning for her to follow. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." The basement door was already open. Emma's legs felt weak as she followed him down the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the smell of damp and rust. A single bulb swung overhead, casting uneven shadows across the concrete floor. Michael stopped in front of the locked door and turned to her, his eyes unreadable. "You've been curious about what's in here," he said, "and I think it's time you knew." Her throat tightened. "Michael, I don't—" He unlocked the door. The hinges groaned as it opened. Inside was a small room lined with shelves, neatly stacked boxes, jars, and photographs pinned to a board. Faces of women stared back at her, their eyes frozen in fear. She couldn't breathe. "What is this?" "Honesty," he said quietly. "You wanted that, didn't you?" He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a chilling calm. "They were lost, confused. I gave them purpose. Control brings order, Emma. Love, real love, requires power." Tears burned her eyes. "You hurt them?" He smiled, almost tender. "No, I perfected them. Until they disappointed me." Her stomach turned. "And me?" she whispered. Michael's hand brushed her cheek. "You're different. You understand me." She forced a trembling smile, her mind racing. "I do," she said softly. "But maybe you should tell someone else. Someone who can really listen." His eyes narrowed. "Who?" The faint creak of a floorboard above answered for her. Michael turned sharply, too late. The door burst open, light flooding the room as Detective Alvarez and 2 officers descended the stairs, guns drawn. "Michael Wallace," Alvarez barked. "Step away from her." Michael's composure shattered. He lunged, but the officers were faster, tackling him to the ground. His roar filled the basement, raw and feral. "You betrayed me, Emma. You were mine." Emma pressed against the wall, shaking, as Alvarez helped her up. "It's over," he said gently. But as Michael's eyes met hers one last time, cold, unwavering, she knew it wasn't truly over. His shadow would follow her long after he was gone. The trial began 3 months later, but for Emma, time had already lost meaning. Days bled into one another. Headlines, interviews, endless flashes of cameras. Reporters shouted her name in courthouse corridors, twisting her story into something marketable. The perfect wife who didn't know. Inside the courtroom, Michael sat at the defendant's table, dressed neatly in a dark suit, calm as ever. His composure was unnerving, like a man observing, not participating, as if the proceedings were some elaborate play staged for his amusement. When the prosecutor described the evidence, the journal, the sketches, the remains found beneath the old construction site, Emma stared straight ahead. Each revelation felt like a knife reopening wounds she thought had begun to heal. Then came the defense's turn. Their lawyer smiled kindly at her before twisting the knife. "Mrs. Wallace," he said smoothly, "you claim you didn't know about your husband's extracurricular activities. 7 years of marriage and not a single clue?" Her hands trembled on the stand. "He was careful. He hid everything." "Everything?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Or did you choose not to see it?" Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Emma felt her chest tighten. The prosecutor objected, but the damage had been done. She could feel the jurors' eyes on her, not with sympathy, but with curiosity. Was she victim or accomplice? Knave or complicit? Michael turned his head then, meeting her gaze. His expression was serene, almost affectionate. It was the same look he'd given her at dinner, on anniversaries, after lies, a silent reminder that even from behind bars, he could still control the narrative. When she stepped down, Detective Alvarez met her outside the courtroom. "You did fine," he said quietly. She shook her head. "He's still winning. Even now, he won't walk free," Alvarez assured her. "I'm not talking about freedom," she whispered. "I'm talking about memory." The verdict came a week later. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in noise, some cheers, some sobs. Emma didn't move. Justice, she realized, was loud but empty. Outside, the cold January wind cut through her coat as reporters swarmed. She ignored them, walking past flashing cameras toward a waiting car. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt hollow. Because even though Michael Wallace was behind bars, his voice still echoed in her head, soft and certain. "You're different. You understand me." Freedom didn't come the day Michael was sentenced. It came in fragments, quiet, unsteady, and incomplete. Emma moved out of the house that winter. The rooms had become mausoleums of memory. The polished dining table where he smiled across the candles. The basement door still bearing faint scratches from the night everything ended. She left most of her belongings behind. Some ghosts, she decided, deserved to stay buried. She found a small apartment downtown, modest and anonymous. The first night there, she lay awake listening to the hum of the city outside. No creaking floors, no whispered voices, no footsteps pacing the hall. But silence, she discovered, was its own kind of noise. She began seeing a therapist, though words never came easily. When asked about love, she could only shake her head. "It wasn't love," she said once, her voice hollow. "It was control dressed as devotion." The therapist nodded gently. "That's how monsters hide, Emma. They learn the language of affection." Sometimes Emma caught herself repeating Michael's phrases. "Don't worry. You're imagining things. I'm doing this for us." They spilled out of her mouth like habits she couldn't unlearn. His presence lingered, not in body, but in thought, in reflex, in the quiet conditioning of years spent under his gaze. True crime shows began airing documentaries about the Wallace case. She avoided them at first, but one night she watched. They called her the wife who lived with a killer. Their narrations cold, dramatized, distant. The actor playing Michael smiled the way he used to. The actress playing her cried too much. The documentary ended with the narrator's solemn question, "How well can we ever know the person we love?" Emma turned off the television, but the question stayed. In the months that followed, she tried rebuilding. Photography classes, new friends, new routines. Yet every attempt at normalcy felt staged, like living someone else's life. When a man at the cafe smiled at her one afternoon, she smiled back automatically. But her pulse quickened. The shape of trust had changed. It now looked too much like danger. Sometimes she dreamed of Michael. Not violent dreams, but tender ones. The way he used to laugh, the smell of his cologne, the mornings they shared coffee and quiet conversation. She would wake with tears on her cheeks, not from longing, but from confusion, because even now she couldn't fully separate the man she loved from the monster he'd been. One evening, as dusk settled outside her window, she took out her camera for the first time in months. Through the lens, she focused on a single candle flickering on the table. The light trembled, steadying itself against the dark. Emma pressed the shutter. The photo would capture what her heart already knew. Some ghosts don't haunt houses. They haunt memory. And though Michael's body was gone from her world, his shadow would always remain, whispering softly in the spaces where love once lived.